What if some of the healthiest vegetables in history quietly vanished from our plates, and we never noticed? Centuries ago, medieval farmers cultivated superfoods that didn't just fill bellies, they helped communities survive famine, cold winters, and war. But over time, they disappeared, replaced by crops that grew faster, looked prettier, or lasted longer on supermarket shelves. Let's travel back and rediscover the first of these forgotten heroes. First up, sugar root, a vegetable so sweet and reliable it was once fit for royalty. Back in the Middle Ages, sugar root was the silent workhorse of every humble garden. Unlike today's carrots that require endless weeding and watering, sugar root was almost magical. You'd plant it once, and it would multiply underground with no extra effort. It was like the medieval version of a savings account that grew food instead of interest. And the taste? Naturally sweeter than modern carrots or parsnips. These slim, white roots were so delicious that European nobility demanded them in palace gardens. In fact, sugar root had such a devoted fan club. Among kings and queens, it was once referred to as the root of comfort in ancient texts. But it wasn't just about taste. Sugar root was a survivor. When crops failed and winter made farming nearly impossible, it kept growing beneath the frozen soil, quietly feeding the hungry. No wonder old farming manuals called it the poor man's protector. And in the kitchen, it was a marvel. Roasted, boiled, added to stews, or even baked into sweet pies, sugar root was the potato before potatoes even arrived in Europe. But with modern farming obsessed with speed and size, sugar root fell into obscurity. Today, it's a ghost of a crop that once fed entire villages. And yet, it's just the beginning. Next, meet a vegetable that acted like a weed but tasted like a delicacy. Umbrella. Originally brought to Britain by the Romans, umbrella didn't believe in staying in its lane. It grew wherever it pleased, roadsides, cliffs, even cracks in stone walls. But instead of being a nuisance, it turned out to be one of the most underrated vegetables in history. Every part of umbrella was edible. The stems were eaten like celery. The flowers brightened salads. The seeds were crushed to replace black pepper, and the leaves, somewhere between parsley and celery, flavored soups and stews. Its bold yellow blossoms even attracted helpful bees and butterflies. It was the freelance worker of medieval gardens, never invited, always useful. Yet by the 1700s, umbrella vanished. Celery took its place, and most people today wouldn't recognize it even if it was growing wild at their feet. But if umbrella was wild and unpredictable, our next plant was its opposite, iron leaf, the quiet powerhouse of medieval kitchens. No one knows why it earned the noble nickname Good King Henry. But iron leaf grew everywhere, from wild forests to neat garden rows, and it required absolutely no attention. Plant it once, and it returned every year like clockwork. If vegetables had job interviews, iron leaf would list unmatched reliability as its strongest skill. It was also a nutritional powerhouse, with more iron than spinach and high doses of vitamin C. Two things medieval diets desperately lacked, especially during long, hungry springs. Its young shoots were eaten like asparagus, its mature leaves like spinach, and its flower buds like little broccoli heads. 3 vegetables in one. Iron leaf also had healing powers. Its leaves were used on wounds, while root tea was a gentle remedy for stomach troubles. In some parts of Europe, it was simply called all good. That's how respected it was. But as farming turned commercial, iron leaf, like so many others, was pushed aside for crops that could be harvested fast, packaged perfectly, and sold in bulk. These 3, sugar root, umbrella, and iron leaf, were more than vegetables. They were lifelines, quietly working behind the scenes while kingdoms rose and fell. And today, they're almost completely forgotten, but we're just getting started. In the next part, we meet the vegetable that tasted like oysters and a fruit that had to rot before it became sweet. Stay with us as we dig deeper into the medieval pantry. We uncover vegetables that not only nourished the body but also puzzled the mind. Some looked like nothing we eat today. Some tasted like something they shouldn't. And some required controlled rotting to even be edible. Let's begin with the strangest seafood you'll ever dig out of the dirt. Oyster nip. To the untrained eye, oyster nip looks like a skinny, ugly root. But cook it the right way, and it transforms into something shocking, a vegetable that tastes like oysters. No wonder it became a holy grail during fasting seasons when meat and fish were off limits. Records from medieval monasteries in the 1400s show that monks specifically grew oyster nip during Lent, as a stand-in for seafood. There were two kinds, one pale and slender, the other dark and bold. Both had tough outer skins that needed to be peeled, but beneath that rough exterior was a flavor so delicate it was considered sacred in both taste and purpose. Oyster nip was a winter warrior. It didn't care about the cold. While other crops died in frozen soil, it stayed alive underground. People simply dug it up as needed, using it in warm broths, pies, and stews. And once harvested, it could be stored for months without spoiling, an absolute gift in an age before refrigeration. But as the centuries rolled on, oyster nip was left behind. It didn't grow fast, it wasn't pretty, and in a world chasing convenience, this strange root was quietly buried in history. Next comes a fruit so odd, it had a medieval nickname we can't even say out loud: Wintelbloom. Picture this, a small, brown apple with an open bottom, so hard and bitter when fresh that no one in their right mind would eat it. But medieval people knew its secret. Wintelbloom had to rot, or more precisely, go through a process called bletting, before it became edible. You'd leave it in straw or on a windowsill until it softened, darkened, and almost collapsed into itself. The result? A flesh that turned into something like cinnamon applesauce. Sweet, rich, slightly fermented, and incredibly delicious. Medieval cookbooks from the 1200s list Wintelbloom tarts, wines, and jellies as festive treats for late autumn and winter. In a world where fresh fruit vanished with the cold, this bizarre, wrinkly survivor brought comfort and joy during the harshest months. It was strange, it was slow, but it was also treasured. And yet, like so many others, it was abandoned. Modern agriculture prefers fruits that are immediately edible and visually flawless. Wintelbloom needed patience. And in our rush for fast food, patience lost the race. But while Wintelbloom demanded time, our next hero demanded nothing at all. Meet starpetal, the unstoppable weed that became one of the most important survival foods in Europe. Tiny, leafy, and crowned with delicate white blossoms, starpetal showed up everywhere, in fields, footpaths, and gardens. No one planted it, no one invited it, but it arrived anyway. And thankfully, people were smart enough to recognize its value. Starpetal grows fast. It reseeds itself thousands of times. It thrives in almost any soil, and in many regions, it stays green year-round. The fresh leaves were eaten raw or boiled and packed with 7 times more vitamin C than oranges. In winter, when other greens disappeared, starpetal kept families from falling into scurvy. Peasants used it in everyday meals. Even nobles were known to serve it when other fresh foods were scarce, and it didn't stop at nutrition. Starpetal was used in folk medicine to treat fevers, inflammation, and skin irritations. It was, in every way, a miracle nobody planted, but over time it got labeled something else, a weed. Modern herbicides targeted it. Farmers pulled it without thought. And now it's a forgotten savior, replaced by bagged spinach with fewer nutrients and more packaging. 3 strange legends: oyster nip, Wintelbloom, and starpetal. One tasted like the sea. One had to rot before it could shine. And one never asked for attention but saved lives in silence. These were not just vegetables. They were stories, they were solutions, and they remind us how far we've drifted from the wisdom of our ancestors' food. But our journey doesn't end here. In the next part, we'll meet a black-skinned root that stored better than anything in the medieval pantry, a green onion that could feed a family for 10 years, and a wild weed so rich in nutrients it was more valuable than kale. Are you ready to keep digging? In a time when life was uncertain and winters were cruel, survival didn't come from fancy crops. It came from vegetables that could endure. The ones that didn't just grow, they lasted. They could be dug from frozen ground, hidden in cellars, and still feed families long after the harvest was gone. Let's begin with a root that might just be the ultimate medieval prepper, nightroot. Yes, the name sounds ominous. But this black-skinned, white-fleshed root was a treasured staple in Europe's oldest monastery gardens. Often confused with its cousin, oysternip, nightroot had a straighter form and a sweeter, more subtle taste, with hints of asparagus and nut. But its real magic wasn't in the flavor. It was in the storage. Dig up nightroot in autumn, bury it in sand in a cool cellar, and it would stay fresh for 8 months. In an age without refrigeration, that made it a miracle. Monks grew it for fasting seasons. Healers brewed its root into calming teas. And unlike many fragile crops, nightroot could sit quietly underground, waiting for the day it would be needed, like food security in vegetable form. But modern farming had no time for slow growers. Nightroot faded, replaced by vegetables that grew bigger, faster, and looked better in plastic. Next, let's talk about a plant that solved a food crisis for a whole decade, evergreen scallion. Despite the name, it wasn't from Wales, and it wasn't even a true onion. But this misunderstood little green was one of the most important survival foods in the medieval world. Originally from East Asia, evergreen scallion reached Europe via ancient trade routes. And once planted, it never stopped giving. It was perennial, meaning you could harvest from it every year without planting again. Each root multiplied, forming clumps that could be split and shared. One gardener's crop became a village's supply. In fact, one gardening manual claimed a single evergreen scallion plant could feed a family for 10 years. Its hollow green shoots were used like chives or spring onions, flavoring soups, stews, and even bread. But what made it especially vital was its winter hardiness. While other plants died back in the cold, evergreen scallion stayed green, even in snow. And yet, it too was forgotten, replaced by big bulb onions that looked good on grocery shelves but couldn't survive a real winter. Finally, let's meet the humble weed that might have been the most powerful plant in medieval Europe, feathergrain. It didn't need a garden. It didn't need care. Feathergrain just showed up. It grew in fields, by fences, between stones, in alleyways. It was considered a nuisance, until people realized it was packed with more protein than cabbage, more iron than spinach, and more calcium than kale. In times of famine, feathergrain was a lifesaver. People boiled the leaves like spinach, tossed them in salads, or dried the seeds to grind into flour. Chickens fed with it laid more eggs. Humans fed with it survived winter. Archaeologists have found mountains of feathergrain seeds in old trash pits, proving it was eaten constantly. And yet today it's been rebranded as a pest, wiped out by modern herbicides without a second thought. Imagine tossing out a superfood because it didn't fill out the right form to be a vegetable. 3. Guardians of survival, nightroot, evergreen scallion, and feathergrain. Each one was a quiet warrior against hunger. Each one proved that nature doesn't always look the way we expect, but it always provides, if we let it. Yet as trade expanded and new crops arrived from distant lands, even these champions were eventually left behind. Not all medieval vegetables were plain or survival-focused. Some were bold, loud, and unforgettable. They didn't just feed, they flavored, they healed, they brightened the darkest months of the year. But as time marched forward, their intensity became their curse. Let's begin with one of the loudest herbs ever to grace a garden, bold leaf. Roman soldiers carried it in their pouches as they marched across Europe, planting it wherever they camped. Monks made sure every monastery had a bold leaf bush growing by the kitchen wall. Why? Because this herb was celery on steroids. Imagine the flavor of celery, parsley, and something wild, all crammed into one leaf. That was bold leaf. Just one. Sprig could flavor an entire pot of soup. Dried leaves went on meat, crushed seeds into bread. Roots were boiled like parsnips, and the hollow stems. They were candied into medieval sweets. But bold leaf wasn't just about taste. It was a medicine. Chest, too. The entire plant helped with digestion, bloating, kidney trouble, and more. Monastery records from the 1200s mention bold leaf tea as a go-to cure for stomach ailments. One bold leaf plant could live for 20 years, grow over 6 feet tall, and thrive through brutal winters. So why did we abandon it? Simple. Imported spices. As cinnamon, black pepper, and cloves flooded Europe, humble bold leaf lost its place. Its intense taste no longer fit the softer, sweeter flavor trends of the modern age. Now imagine a green so misunderstood it's still struggling with its identity. Grainfield salad. No, it doesn't contain corn. Its name comes from where it grows, naturally popping up in grain fields after harvest. Farmers once saw it as a post-harvest gift from the soil. It was the quiet genius of winter greens. Grainfield salad has small, spoon-shaped leaves with a mild, nutty taste and none of the bitterness found in most wild plants. Best of all, it grows in late autumn and stays green through winter. When nothing else survived, Grainfield salad stepped in, full of iron, vitamin C, and even omega-3s. Modern dietitians would love it, but thanks to its confusing name and short shelf life, it vanished from supermarkets and from memory. Now contrast that soft-spoken green with our next star, a herb so intense, it scared off modern chefs. Fiery fern. With bright yellow flowers and jagged fern-like leaves, fiery fern was the rock star of the medieval kitchen. Its flavor? Bitter, spicy, sharp, and slightly sweet, like a thunderclap of seasoning. There are over 40 different compounds in its leaves, each one bursting with aroma. Cooks used it in puddings, infused it in ale, sprinkled it on cheese, and made it into Easter cakes. It was also a powerful natural preservative, keeping meats and breads fresh for days. Medicinally, fiery fern was a warrior too, treating fevers, digestive issues, and even driving away worms. Monks planted it by doorways because its scent kept flies and pests away. But eventually, it was too much. Its loud medicinal punch didn't match modern tastes. Fiery fern faded into history. Not because it failed, but because it refused to whisper. 3 flavor titans, bold leaf, Grainfield salad, and fiery fern. One was strong enough to season a feast. One could thrive in snow. And one was so intense, it was practically medieval hot sauce. Together, they shaped the taste of an entire era. But flavor wasn't the only forgotten gift of medieval vegetables. In our final chapter, we'll discover coastal crops that prevented scurvy, a plant that doubled as a dye in dinner, and one vegetable that had half its nutrition ignored for centuries. As we reach the end of our journey through forgotten foods, we uncover plants that grew where nothing else could, fed sailors, colored kingdoms, and hid half their power in plain sight. These were the unsung heroes of medieval kitchens, and the final witnesses to a lost wisdom we urgently need to remember. Let's start with the gift of the sea, shore leaf. It grew wild along the coasts of northern Europe, thriving in sand, salt, and wind. Where most plants died, shore leaf flourished. It didn't need rich soil. It didn't need protection. It simply survived. In spring, people harvested its pale shoots, blanched and tender, tasting like mild asparagus. Later in the season, they used its cabbage-like leaves for hearty stews, but its true power, vitamin C shore leaf, had 6 times more vitamin C than lemons. For fishing communities with no access to fresh fruit, it saved lives, preventing scurvy, when nothing else could. And yet, modern society completely forgot it. Why? Because shore leaf never made it to the market shelves. It didn't come in shiny packaging or sit neatly in boxes. It just grew, and we let it go. Next comes a plant with a split personality, half food, half dye. Meet bluestem. Before modern synthetic colors, bluestem leaves were fermented into a deep blue pigment that dyed everything from royal robes to war paint. Kings wore it. Warriors smeared it. Artists relied on it. But before it turned smelly and strong, bluestem was something else, a leafy green. In early spring, farmers harvested its young leaves before they developed dye compounds. Tossed into salads or soups, they tasted like mild mustard greens with a peppery twist. But as industrial dye took over and bluestem's fermentation stank up cities, it was banned from growing near towns. Its identity as a food faded, smothered by its other life as a symbol of power. Finally, we returned to a vegetable that never really disappeared, but was only ever half used. Root leaf. You probably know it by its bottom half, the turnip. But medieval farmers understood that the top half, the leafy greens, was just as valuable. Root leaf greens contain 4 times more calcium, 3 times more vitamin A, and double the protein of the root itself. Poor families relied on those leaves all winter long, carefully plucking the outer greens while allowing the root below to grow. In soups, in broths, in simple pan-fried dishes, root leaf greens were a key to survival. But modern agriculture focused on the part you can package. The greens? Often thrown out. Wasted. Just imagine buying a smartphone only to use it as a flashlight. That's how we treat turnips today. 3 final guardians, shore leaf, blue stem, and root leaf. 1 fed fishing villages and fought scurvy. 1 painted kingdoms and flavored spring meals, and 1 had half its power ignored by modern eyes. Now take a step back. From sugar root to root leaf, we've uncovered 15 forgotten vegetables that once sustained entire civilizations. They grew without chemicals. They fed without fail. They healed, preserved, nourished, and flavored a world with no supermarkets and no safety nets. So why did we forget them? Because we replaced patience with speed, resilience with appearance, nutrition with shelf life. But these plants didn't disappear. They're still out there, growing wild, hiding in corners, waiting for someone to remember. Maybe that someone is you. Because in these ancient vegetables lies a secret we've forgotten. Real food doesn't come from factories. It comes from the earth. And sometimes the past still has the best recipes for the future.